I bring you people who committed one or more murders after getting out of prison for a previous murder, murderers who have murdered other murderers in prison for being murderers. There are familial murders, racist murders and assassinations. Let's go.
The evidence I have heard shows you to be a jealous man, soaked in self-pity, a man who holds women in utter contempt.
That's putting it mildly, Mr. Justice Benethan. This is the judge who sentenced Kyle Clifford for the 3 horrendous murders that he committed on the 9th of July 2024, his sentencing having come in March 2025. Now viewer, if I've got you hooked on the story so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. This triple killer is going to cost the taxpayer millions because he's paralysed. That means in prison he needs lots of extra care. He paralysed himself in a failed suicide attempt that he made just before he got arrested for the murder of his ex-girlfriend Louise Hunt, her mother Carol and another sister in the family, Hannah. He committed those murders in the home of his ex-girlfriend on the 9th of July 2024. In addition, he raped Louise and held her captive for 2 hours before murdering her, and the judge of his trial said it must have become obvious to Louise in the course of her captivity that Clifford had already killed her mother.
This is no occasion to subject the family and friends of your victims to any delay or suspense. I therefore make clear at once that for each of these 3 murders, the sentence will be one of life imprisonment with a whole life order. That means a sentence from which you will never be released.
And let me clarify that at the time of his sentencing, Clifford was in his 20s. I don't know how the police missed in their initial pat-down of Louis de Zoysa, which they performed when they arrested him on the 25th of September 2020, the gun that he had on him. With that gun, in the police station down in Croydon, the man shot and killed Sergeant Matt Ratana.
Stand up, mate.
He's been a bit...
Go on.
I think this is it.
I understand, stand up.
So please leave.
What?
Please leave. I think I'm going to pass on.
Okay, listen to me. My name's Matt, I'm the custody officer, right? I'm in charge. I'm not involved in the investigation. You've been arrested on suspicion of possession of bullets, ammunition and possession of intent to supply.
Class B.
Class B, anything else?
No, that's it.
Alright, your detention's not been authorised yet, but I can authorise a search of you under section 54 of PACE. Stand up. Mate, you're good enough to...
With the 4 shots that he fired from what was in fact the antique gun that he'd managed to retain on his person, he hit Sergeant Ratana in the chest and leg. He got his whole life order in 2023. Damien Bendall committed his horrendous acts under the influence of drugs. He murdered, first of all, his girlfriend who was pregnant with his child. Then he murdered her 2 young children. And then he murdered the school friend of one of the children who was staying over. This all took place in the Derbyshire town of Kilmarsh in September 2021. He also confessed to the rape of one of the children, a little girl.
I don't know what happened. Come to me. Mate, have you got anything on you that you shouldn't have? No, there's no weapons or nothing. Right.
Do you just want to undo your coat? Have you armed yourself?
Yeah.
You have?
Have you stabbed yourself, mate?
I can see blood on your hands.
Yeah. Anywhere else?
Just my chest, 4 inches in with a bread knife.
Can we have a look?
And one on the stomach. I bled quite.
Right, do you want?
Yes. Can we go down
No, just stay there.
I just don't want to be in front of her.
Alright, just go around the corner.
Just walking wounded at the minute.
Alright, stand here. See ya.
Right.
So,
We're told, I know what's going to happen to you now, mate.
Well, I know it's going to happen
just
when you go to prison, obviously, but again.
Why? What have you done? Have you done something to anyone else?
Yeah.
What have you done?
I've murdered 4 people.
07:47 hours. I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence. Do not mention when questioned something later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Your arrest is necessary to protect you from harm, to prevent your disappearance, for a prompt and effective investigation. Okay? We're going to get you up, we're going to put you in the back of the van.
Recently, he's been involved in some kind of violence at the prison that he is being held in. It was over some workshop equipment, some, really harmful equipment, and he attacked someone with it. When I heard about that on TikTok, I looked at the comments of the TikTok and everyone was saying the same thing. Why are you letting somebody who killed 4 people, including 3 children, anywhere near workshop tools that can cause harm or death to others? Bendall got his whole life order in 2022.
This was a cruel, calculated and cynical campaign of child murder involving the smallest and most vulnerable of children, knowing that your actions were causing significant physical suffering and would cause untold mental suffering.
For murdering 7 newborn babies and attempting to murder a further 8, former neonatal nurse Lucy Letby is doing a record 15 whole life prison sentences. Everyone always talks about how normal Lucy Letby seemed to everyone. She had a good circle of friends, a great social life, went on holidays with her colleagues at work. People liked her well enough. She had a bit of a fling with a married doctor. She worked at the Countess of Chester Hospital and she murdered babies and attempted to murder them by injecting insulin and air into their bloodstream. Lucy Letby's murder trial lasted nearly a year. It finished in summer 2023 and Letby got 14 whole life orders. The following year, she got her 15th whole life order following a retrial of one of the murder charges, or it was either a murder charge or a charge of attempted murder. Either way, she was convicted. There are lots of people who say that Lucy Letby is a scapegoat. The deaths of those newborn babies, who I think were all premature, were due to clinical errors of other people. She keeps appealing. Her story, I think, will continue to unravel for many years to come.
Right, start the same thing at the moment. For me, I'm in defence. I'm answering questions. Subsequently, and we do some evidence. Anything you say now is evidential, alright?
I know his own source can't be that.
Brian Whitelock, who comes from Swansea in Wales, is another triple murderer. His first 2 victims were Nicky Morgan and Glenn Whitelock. Glenn was his own brother. He killed them in the course of a drink and drugs party over at the home of Nicky Morgan. When he got out, he then was befriended by a lady called Wendy Buckney. She was a 71-year-old lady. She loved her horses. She knew about Brian Whitelock's past, but she believed that everyone deserved a second chance. One day, under the influence of drink and drugs again, just like in the case of his first 2 murders, he went over to Wendy Buckney's home, battered her, did something sexual against her, and then after he finished battering her to death with all kinds of things, including some shelving, he loaded a pile of furniture and things over her body and walked away. He got his whole life prison order in 2024. Wayne Couzens was allowed to appeal his whole life order for the murder that he committed in March 2021. However, in the space of less than 10 seconds, the Court of Appeal dismissed his appeal.
Couzens seeks leave to appeal against sentence. In his case, we grant leave to appeal against sentence but dismiss the appeal.
Wayne Couzens was a Metropolitan Police officer. In March 2021, he did a bogus arrest of a 33-year-old marketing executive called Sarah Everard, stopping her on the street and telling her that as she was out on the street, she was in breach of COVID restrictions and she had to go with him to the police station. What he in fact did was to drive her out of London and all the way down to Kent, rape her and then strangle her to death with his police belt. He then burnt her body in a fridge in some woods. It was in an area of some woodland that he actually owned. When Couzens was arrested, which took place in his very home on the 9th of March 2021, 6 days after he did what he did, he was completely taken by surprise. The man must have known that he was going to get caught. He doesn't seem to have taken into account the presence of CCTV or done anything to protect himself against it. He used his mobile. The data would obviously incriminate him. And keep in mind that this isn't just any old bog standard criminal. This was a police officer, somebody who knows about investigation techniques and so on, so he should have been more clued up on covering his tracks than the average basic bog standard criminal. Then again, we're glad he wasn't. We're glad that he failed to cover his tracks, because thanks to his failure to cover his tracks, he got caught. Anyway, because he wasn't expecting it, or at the very least, he possibly wasn't expecting it quite so soon, he was wholly unprepared. So listen to the joke of the story that he gave the police when he admitted to abducting Sarah. This is his explanation of what he did.
Well, I am in financial shit, and I've been lent on by, I don't know who they are. They're a group, a gang, whatever. And they told me, right, I need to go and pick up girls and give them to them. There's a couple of names. I was told a place to take her. That's it. That is all I know.
There was a subsequent inquiry into the behaviour of Wayne Couzens during his career as a police officer, and it was concluded that there were so many missed opportunities to disrupt and halt the man's offending. He did things like flashing on a number of occasions. He was addicted to extreme pornography and tried to get his colleagues to watch it with him. He had a warning at one point for being excessively violent during an arrest. He went missing at one point. He was in loads and loads of debt, and when that happens, a police officer can be kicked out of the force because having money problems makes them more susceptible to bribery and corruption.
The inquiry has seen evidence that Couzens allegedly committed a very serious sexual assault against a child, barely in her teens, before his policing career even started. Problems of money also predated his career with the police. Couzens had substantial unsecured debt by the time he was arrested for Sarah's murder. At the same time, the Metropolitan Police Service were taking action to recover up to £15,000 that had been paid to him in error, and a year-long mortgage holiday was about to expire that month. It is alleged that on a number of occasions, Couzens tried to show friends and colleagues pornography, including some of a violent and extreme nature. It is further alleged that on at least 2 occasions, he shared unsolicited photographs of his penis with young women, and that he paid female online retailers to masturbate into clothes and send them to him. Since his conviction for Sarah's abduction, rape and murder, Couzens has been convicted of further crimes of indecent exposure, one of which he had already been linked to while a serving police officer.
Couzens got his whole life order in 2021. Between 2009 and 2010, Stephen Griffiths, who comes from Bradford in Yorkshire, murdered 3 women: 43-year-old Susan Rushworth, 31-year-old Shirley Armitage, and 36-year-old Suzanne Blamyers. All 3 women happened to be sex workers. Griffiths killed his victims with a crossbow and also claimed to have cannibalised any one or more of them, although that latter claim has never been proven. His act of giving the middle finger to the security cameras in his block of flats was just one piece of evidence that showed that he actually wanted to be caught, and it was all in order to gain notoriety. And yet, in his police interview, he showed no remorse or anything, and a lot of the time he acted very casual, as if murdering 3 people was a light light-hearted matter, but when it came to saying why he did what he did, he was somewhat shy and reluctant to go into the details. He said he didn't know, which contradicts his whole demeanour from beforehand. As I say, waving his middle finger at the camera, leaving lots of clues. I think he left a phone or something of his on a train, wanting someone to find it, look through it, and then hand it into the police to help them catch him. That attitude isn't seen when he's asked why he did what he did. Just watch.
What were you setting things on fire for?
Well, to destroy DNA, but like I say, in such a reckless, crazy manner. I can't believe, mind you, I don't know, I think, like I said, caretaker perhaps had other things on his mind, but otherwise I can't believe, you know, with the smoke that must have been billowing out of the windows. Although I did keep them shut for a while as well, so that's why I got a lot of soot all over me, and eventually I got a breathing mask on. But
So, how would you know that the fire destroys DNA?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I mean, that was something I always kept meaning to check up on the internet, but it was just an assumption that, well, certainly I think the principle I operated on was, well, it certainly isn't going to enhance the quality of the evidence.
Why did you feel the need to kill her?
I don't know. I don't know if I say just sometimes you killed someone to kill yourself or kill parents. I don't know. It's like deep issues inside me.
He got his whole life order in 2010, and while in prison he has attempted suicide on several occasions, but staff have always caught him in time. And in 2011 he went on a 120-day hunger strike, during which time he avoided contact with other people. But there is such a crazy irony to this guy's story. In 2009 he went to the University of Bradford to write a PhD in homicide studies. On that basis, if you're getting echoes of Brian Kohberger from over in Idaho in the USA and of Nassim Sadi from right here in the UK, you're not the only one. Griffiths has been attacked on a number of occasions in prison. On one occasion in 2024, he was knocked out by somebody who used to be a friend of his third victim, Susan Blamires. And that's the story of Stephen Griffiths. In October 2020, over a period of 7 days, Anthony Russell murdered 3 people. On the 23rd of October 2020, a lady called Julie Williams, 58, phoned West Midlands Police to report that her son, David Williams, 31, hadn't been seen since the 21st of October. On the 25th of October, West Midlands Police were called by Miss Williams' sister to report that Miss Williams herself, Julie Williams, was now also missing. Police officers forced their way into Miss Williams' house and found her dead on the living room floor. Having killed David Williams, who had been his friend over a disagreement or something, when the man's mother went to him and asked if he'd seen her son, Russell said no. He then offered to help the woman look for her son, only to kill her as well. Knowing that the police would soon come looking for him, the perpetrator scarpered from his hometown of Coventry in the West Midlands over to Leamington Spa, where he battered and robbed 3 people who I think were all elderly and left them for dead. Then he got chatting to a 31-year-old woman called Nicole McGregor, who at the time was 18 weeks pregnant and addicted to drugs. It was on the promise of drugs that Russell was able to lure Nicole to Parkland and then grape and murder her there. He then repeated the same performance of concerned friend that he had put on with the mother of his first victim, Nicole's boyfriend being the dupe of this second performance of his. The boyfriend not realising that the man helping him look for his girlfriend was the very person who had done away with her. Russell got his whole life order in 2022. Stephen Sansom is a double murderer. His first murder came in Christmas 1998, where he killed a taxi driver just for a few quid. He rammed a kitchen knife, I think, into the guy's neck, and then he destroyed the man's mobile phone to make sure that he couldn't call for help. Then he got out, and for a year or two he was fine, didn't get into any trouble, but he kept taking drugs. He got involved with a woman called Gemma Watts, and she was just as bad as him. She liked to BDSM. She used to let Sansom beat the CRAP out of her, and between the two of them they plotted that they would get a woman to come over and hack her to bits or kill her in some way. So then one day they got an ex-girlfriend, or somebody at least that Sansom had dated for a while, by the name of Sarah Mayhew, who in fact was the one who introduced Gemma to Sansom. It's not known exactly what they did to her to cause her death, because when several weeks later her body was found, it was all in pieces and it was very badly decomposed, so it was impossible to trace exactly what had been done to her. Gemma got 30 years for Sarah Mayhew's murder because that was her first murder. In the case of Sansom, however, it was his second murder which led him to getting a whole life order. That came in early 2025. Arthur Simpson-Kent murdered his partner, who was a former EastEnders actress called Cyan Blake, and she was 43, and he also killed their two sons, Zachary, aged 8, and Amon, aged 4. He did so by beating and stabbing all three of them at their home in Erith in London in December 2015. Police believe that Simpson-Kent committed the murders because Cyan was planning to leave him. He buried the bodies of the three victims in the garden and then ran away to Ghana, but he was later caught and brought back to the UK. He got his whole life order in October 2016. The three men that Joanna Dennehy murdered in March 2013 were none other than her friends, her sexual partners to be exact. When she was little, Joanna Dennehy was a very kind, caring, sensitive girl, very close to her sister. She was a very academically gifted pupil who had aspirations of becoming a lawyer, until one day in her teens, for reasons that people just can't explain, she changed. She got into drugs, she got into drink, she got into sex. She ran off with a bloke who was a lot older than her that she came onto, had a couple of babies with him. Then that relationship broke down. She went to prison, came out, got in with some really, really dodgy characters, and then in March 2013 killed 3 people and tried to kill another 2. She said that the reason she did it is because she wanted to see if she was as evil and as cold-hearted as she thought she was, and that after she killed the first person, she had to keep going. It was moreish and she couldn't get enough. At the police station, Dennehy acted as if she was being arrested for stealing a charger, joking and flirting with the police officers.
Looks good.
Thanks, Matt. That makes me feel so good. Real sexy. Not a t-shirt, it's a tent.
Joanne, signature from you that we've got your property.
Right, so one mark for attempted murder and murder.
You've been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and murder.
Attempted murder and murder, is that it? So going down for Sunday Rose? Excuse me.
She was convicted in 2014 along with the 3 men, her so-called undertakers that had helped her, in particular by getting rid of the bodies. And in fact, Joanna Dennehy's killings were known as the Peterborough ditch murders because they dumped the bodies in a ditch out in Peterborough in Cambridgeshire. The 3 accomplices were given finite terms, and I think at least one of them has since been released. Dennehy herself got her whole life order in 2014. Stephen Port, who was born in 1975, is not only a serial killer, but also a serial rapist. Between 2014 and 2015, Port murdered 4 young men that he met online. He'd get them to come over to his flat over in Barking in East London, and there he would drug them with GHB, gamma hydroxybutyric acid, quite a well-known date grape drug, and then of course grape them. And all 4 victims died from an overdose of the drug. In the case of one victim, Paul inserted the drug, or rather injected it, directly into the man's you-know-what hole.
So did you have any involvement in the death of the male that we just spoke about a short while ago, Gabriel Klein?
No, I didn't.
So, were you involved in administering any drugs or poisons or noxious substances to him?
No, I don't administer drugs to anyone or give drugs to anyone. That's done at the party you buy.
Might help if I show you a picture. I'll call this CRT 2. This is Jack Taylor. Do you recognise that, mate?
No. No, I just don't recognise him. I don't pay full attention to the guy's faces when I have paid attention to the parties. But I don't recognise his face.
So you don't recognise his face?
I do not know. No.
And I mean, that's Jack Taylor. So you don't recognise?
No, I don't.
Jack Taylor.
No.
Paul got his whole life order in 2016. To this day, though, apparently he denies any of the murders. Dale Cregan's murder of 2 women police officers in 2012 was as vile and shocking as it was gratuitous. Fiona Bone, 32, and Nicola Hughes, 23, were out on a routine patrol on the 18th of September 2012 when they were sent to Abbey Gardens in Hattersley, Tameside in Greater Manchester. This was at about 11 a.m. and it was in response to a report of criminal damage. Someone had phoned up and said that some random person had thrown a pavement slab through their window. The person who made that call was well-known gangster Dale Cregan, only the person taking the call didn't know that at the time.
Police emergency.
Someone just threw a big concrete slab through my back window and ran off.
Of the house or a car? What are we talking?
No, sorry, in my back window in the house.
In the house. What's the address there, please?
30 Abbey Gardens, Mosham.
Did you see them?
Seen one, yeah.
Do you know them?
No, I don't know.
Okay. Do you know why they've done it?
I haven't got a clue.
Okay. Is it a rear window, did you say?
Yeah, it's in the back garden.
So it's just happened prior to your ringing, has it, yeah?
Yeah.
And it's a piece of concrete, yeah?
Yeah, it's a piece of concrete at the corner of a paving stone.
Your name, please?
Adam.
What's your second name, Adam?
Archery. Oh.
You sound as bad as I do.
Yeah.
Right, I'll get an officer up there, have a look round, see if they can see anybody similar, and then they'll come and see you. All right, Adam?
How long would it take? Do you know roughly? I know that it's not that serious. But...
Well, because it's just happened, it's gone in on the priority, so that's within the hour, certainly. But
okay.
They'll try and get up there as soon as, if there's a possibility he's still knocking about.
All right then, thanks very much.
Okay.
I'll be waiting.
All right, Adam.
All right,
bye.
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 When Miss Bone and Miss Hughes turned up to Cregan's home, he opened fire on them, he shot at them, he threw a grenade at them. Fiona Bone died at the scene while Nicola Hughes was badly wounded and died later in hospital. And Dale Cregan's reason for doing that was that he was fed up with the police constantly constantly questioning him and members of his family, going around to their home, all in investigation of a murder. I think it was about 2 murders actually that Cregan had recently carried out. That was literally Cregan's reason for taking the lives of these 2 women. Cregan got his whole life order in June 2013.
Down! Do not move, you understand?
Sharp 2-4, stand by. You're under arrest on suspicion of murder. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence. Do not mention any questions.
In November 2024, double murderer Marcus Osborne lost his appeal to have his whole life order overturned. Osborne killed his former girlfriend and her new partner in 2023 in the month of May in Huddersfield out of sexual jealousy. His ex-girlfriend, a lady called Katie Highton, who was 27, sustained all of 99 injuries in the attack from Osborne, while her new boyfriend, a guy called Mr. Harnett, was mutilated and left with 24 knife wounds. Osborne also raped another woman who he had held captive in the house. Osborne got his whole life order in early 2024. On the afternoon of the 22nd of May 2013, a British Army soldier, drummer Lee Rigby of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, was attacked and killed by Michael Adibolajo and Michael Adibowale near the Royal Artillery Barracks in Woolwich, south-east London. Both men were Muslim converts. 29-year-old Adibolajo was found guilty of Rigby's murder on the 19th of December 2013, and so was Adibowale. Adibolajo, however, held a greater share of liability for the murder of father of one Mr Rigby, such as is reflected in his sentence compared to that of Adibowale. The sentence details coming up soon. The youngest of Adibolajo's 6 children, a little girl, was but 4 days old when, alongside an accomplice, her father went and ran over an innocent man who happened to be in the army before hacking him to death with knives and with a cleaver. In response to the arrival, around 5 minutes later, of armed police officers, the 2 murderous maniacs, who were armed with a gun as well as with the said bladed articles, charged at the police. As a result of the gunfire that they each suffered from the police, the 2 killers were hospitalised, Adibowale having one of his thumbs shot off. In contrast, and thankfully, no police officers were harmed. The calm and coherent way in which Adibolajo explained during his first court appearance his motives for his horrific act, revenge for the killing of Muslims overseas by British soldiers, offered a stark contrast to the notably stilted but no less bravado-laden speaking that he did in his police interview.
We decided to wait in the vicinity of the barracks that is in Woolwich. By the qadr of Allah, by Allah's decree, whilst waiting to find a soldier, because between us we decided that the soldier is the most fair target, because he joins the army with kind of an understanding that your life is at risk when you join the army, you know. So we sat in wait, and it just so happened that he was the soldier that was spotted first.
On the 26th of February 2014, at the Old Bailey, Adibowale got life with a minimum of 45 years, while Adibolajo got his whole life order. John William Cooper, who was born in 1944, is also known as the Bullseye Killer, and he's a Welsh serial killer. On the 26th of May 2011, he was given a whole life order for the 1985 double murder of siblings Richard and Helen Thomas, and for the 1989 double murder of Peter and Gwenda Dixon. The murders were known in the media as the Pembrokeshire murders or the coastal murders, because that's where the murders took place, and because of those murders, tourism in that area dropped dramatically. Cooper was also sentenced for the rape of a 16-year-old girl and a sexual assault on a 15-year-old girl, both of those attacks having been carried out while a group of 5 teenagers were held at gunpoint in March 1996 in a wooded area behind the Mount Estate in Cooper's hometown of Milford Haven in Pembrokeshire. There was literally nothing nice or good about this man. He actually got his first police records between the ages of 17 and 21, and it was for theft of a vehicle, assaulting a police officer, being drunk and disorderly, and ABH. His marriage came shortly after this point, 1966 being when, decades later, his wife died. Knowing as they then did that her husband was a killer, people feared that Cooper had offed her. The woman's death, however, came from natural causes. Giving his daughter away at her own wedding could well be the only kind thing that Cooper ever did for anyone. His son, who he used to batter and bully, having long since disowned him. Cooper once took aim at his son, literally, with a gun and pulled the trigger, delighting, no doubt, in his son's evident fear, which came from his belief that the gun was loaded, which, thankfully, it wasn't. In 1978, Cooper won all of 90,000 quid, around £500,000 in today's money, and he won that on the pools, while also winning a £4,000 car, an Austin Princess, on a Spot the Ball competition. A few short years after, though, every last penny was gone, Cooper having blown it all on racing bets and having become a heavy drinker during this period as well. As for Cooper's double murder of 1989, his second one to remind you, the police could have nabbed the perpetrator within days of discovering the bodies of Mr. and Mrs. Dixon. For some reason, however, they swallowed Cooper's story that the wedding ring that he had recently sold was none other than his very own. They don't seem to have asked to see a picture of it or have tried to trace the buyer, for instance, probes which may well have led them to learn that the ring in question was, of course, Mr. Dixon's. Police had seen that it was missing from the murder victim's finger. Cooper was in prison for numerous burglary offences when, in 2006, the police conducted a cold case review of the murder of the Dixons. When police revealed to Cooper that they had found Mr. Dixon's DNA on a pair of Cooper's shorts, ones that he had taken out of Mr. Dixon's rucksack and then kept after killing Mr. Dixon, and also on his shotgun, Cooper tried to frame his son. He said that his lad always used to take his clothes and wear them without his permission. Another piece of evidence against Cooper was an artist's impression of the perpetrator, which proved to be almost a direct match with the way the perpetrator looked when he went on the game show Bullseye, the episode in question having aired only days after Cooper murdered the Dixons. Personally though, I'd say at least 1,000 other men could have been a match for the artist's sketch. Anyway, that's the diabolical story of John William Cooper. Levi Bellfield is literally evil by name. Born in 1968, he's a serial killer, a sex offender, a rapist, a kidnapper and a burglar. He's also a woman beater. He had numerous relationships which spawned him, I think, 10 or 11 children, and many of those relationships collapsed because he used to beat the you-know-what out of his girlfriend and wives. He was married to some of them and just living with others just as a boyfriend and girlfriend set up. In 2008, he was convicted of the murders of Marsha McDonnell and Emily de la Grange and of the attempted murder of Kate Sheedy, and he got a whole life order. And then in 2011, he was found guilty of the murder of schoolgirl Millie Dowler, and he again received a whole life order for that murder as well. So he's got 2 whole life orders, and he was in fact the first prisoner in the UK to receive 2 whole life orders.
Did you get a kick out of being involved in these sort of inquiries?
No comment.
Do you think it's a macho type of thing to hear?
No.
Do you think it will help your notoriety?
No comment.
Do you honestly believe that your actions over the 21st and the 22nd of March 2002 are the actions of an innocent man?
No comment.
Then are you an innocent man?
No comment.
Because if you are, tell us.
No comment.
And give us that explanation for where you were and what you were doing.
No comment.
Are you able to do that, Leroy?
No comment.
Sarah's told you what she believes you did that particular day, and I wholly support what she says. I believe you took her off the street that day. I believe your motivation was sexual, and I believe you took her back to Collingwood Place, and I believe you killed her there. That's the truth, isn't it?
No comment, sir.
That's what happened. And then you've used the day of next year to move her body. Is that the truth?
No.
Because that's what's happened, isn't it?
No comment.
And then sometime over the following few days, you've driven down to Hampshire, an area that you know, and you've dumped her body.
No comment, sir.
That's the truth, isn't it?
No comment, sir.
He once, as a child, had SHX with a rabbit, and afterwards he broke the rabbit's neck. His original surname was none other than Rabbit. Rabbetts. He used to sleep with his mother. I don't think they did the thing together, but they used to sleep in the same bed for many, many years. I think well into Levi's teens. And whenever he used to go home and see his mother as an adult, again, he used to sleep in the same bed as her. She wiped his body bot for him until he was around 12. And he also, before he took to murder, was alleged to have committed a number of essays against young girls when he worked as a nightclub bouncer. But even though the man is as thick as you know what, somehow he was always able to destroy the DNA evidence that he left behind, and so he was never caught. And the police in many cases didn't take the allegations from the girls who came forward about him seriously. A lot of them took drugs and stuff like that, and the police really just didn't care. And so that is the story of Levi Bellfield. There are numerous videos documenting the life and horrendous crimes of hitman Mark Fellows, who got his whole life order in 2019 after his second murder. He actually worked as a chef, as you know, a day job, and went killing by night, I guess. He also ran marathons, and in fact I think a smartwatch of his or some kind of fitness app was something that helped nail him for the murder of Paul Massey. He was also found guilty of the shooting murder of John Kinsella. This was all up in Liverpool. A Libyan refugee who came to the UK in 2012, 25-year-old Khairi Saadallah, had mental health issues, couldn't stay out of prison, admired Islamic terrorists, and on the 20th of June 2020, stabbed to death 3 total strangers in a park in Reading, Berkshire. Why? Because he wanted to please God, Allah to be exact. Even though Saadallah was from a wealthy family back in Libya, a member of his family reports that the man sought to escape the violence that ravaged his home country, the killer having developed PTSD as a result of their civil war. Between 2015 and 2019, over here in the UK, Saadallah gained 6 convictions relating to as many as 15 crimes, 8 of which having been violent crimes. Sending this refugee back to his home country on account of his criminality, however, would have been a breach of his human rights. A cannabis addict who was radicalised in prison and who was briefly on the radar of MI5, the man had regular visits from a mental health professional. In fact, a day or 2 before he murdered 3 people who were wholly innocent, he spoke to the police about his ongoing therapy sessions, the police having been asked to look into the man's behaviour by none other than the man's brother.
You're feeling a bit down, feeling a bit unwell?
When?
I don't know.
Wait,
No?
Yesterday, yeah.
You were feeling down yesterday. You were supposed to see the crisis team.
I spoke to them, yeah.
You spoke to them. What did you say?
I spoke to them. They say that they're going to bring me back.
They're going to bring you back?
Yeah.
In court, the prosecution described Saadallah's murder of James Furlong, 36, David Wales, 49, and Joe Ritchie Bennett, 39, the 3 men being friends and having all lost their lives in less than a minute at the hands of Saadallah, as, quote, highly effective executions, unquote. They added that as a committed jihadist who, as he killed his 3 victims, was heard to clamour in Arabic, God is great and God accept my jihad. The perpetrator planned the attack with determination and precision, intending to kill as many people as possible. In October 2021, Saadallah was denied permission to appeal his whole life order, which, following his guilty pleas from November 2020, he picked up in his sentencing hearing of January 2021. Steve Wright, who was born in 1958, is known in the media as the Suffolk Strangler, the man behind the Ipswich serial killings of late 2006. Between the 30th of October and the 10th of December 2006, the bodies of 5 women, who all happened to be sex workers, were discovered at different locations near Ipswich in Suffolk, England. While their bodies were discovered naked, there were no signs of SA. Two of the victims, Annalie Alderton and Paula Clennell, were confirmed to have been killed by strangling. The cause of death of the other three victims, Gemma Adams, Tanya Nicol and Annette Nichols, was never established, the perpetrator himself staying silent on the matter. Similarly, the man has never said why he killed the five women. Was it due to resentment of and disgust for women who sell sex, like the case of Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper? Who knows? What is known, though, is that Wright himself was a long-standing user of sex workers. Wright got his whole life order in 2008. In 2013, Jamie Reynolds, who was born around 1990, murdered the 17-year-old daughter of a police officer and then had SEX with her dead body. And he did all of this after spending months writing a twisted tale describing how he would do it. He first of all built a so-called hanging mechanism in the loft hatch of his parents' home over in Wellington in Telford. And then at some point he was able to somehow lure Georgia Williams, an A-level student, over to his home for a fake photo shoot. Georgia agreed to pose for Reynolds while wearing lipstick, stilettos and leather shorts, which he had bought on the internet. In a picture found by the police, Georgia can be seen grinning at the camera with a noose around her neck on the landing of the house. And then moments later, Reynolds throttled his victim with the rope before hanging her from the noose in order to fulfill his sick fantasies, which had been fueled by his obsession with violent pornography. When he was caught, Reynolds was examined by psychiatrists who all agreed that if he hadn't been caught, he would have gone on to become a serial killer. He got his whole life order in 2013. Ali Harbi Ali is an Islamic terrorist. In October 2021, he murdered Conservative MP Sir David Amis. He stabbed him more than 20 times while attending a constituency surgery. Ali pleaded not guilty to murder, but then didn't dispute much of the evidence against him in court. He had also plotted to murder other MPs, all in revenge against those, including Amis, who had voted for airstrikes against Syria. He got his whole life order in 2022. During the Brexit vote of 2016, Thomas Mair, a far-right activist, anti-immigration, anti-anything that isn't white and British, murdered Labour MP Joe Cox. He did that in Birstall in West Yorkshire on the 16th of June 2016. Mair had researched and laid out an assassination plan, and at the point when he attacked Joe Cox, a member of the public tried to rescue her, but Mair then attacked him and stabbed him. And I'm really sorry to say that I don't know either the name of that wonderful man or what became of him. Mair got his whole life order in 2016. Even though the body of 5-year-old Welsh girl April Jones has never been found, Mark Bridger, who was born around 1966, is doing a whole life order for her murder. Around 7:30 on the 1st of October 2012, after letting her little girl play out, April's mother couldn't find April and she straight away called 999. The first officer on the scene spoke to a child's witness who reported having seen April climbing into a grey van. The police immediately upgraded the investigation to a critical incident and launched a massive search for April, which soon brought them to the front door of Mark Bridger. Bridger said that he had accidentally run April over, but that, due to having been drunk, he couldn't remember what he'd done with the body. Nobody believed him, and in 2013, after being found guilty of April's abduction and murder, and also of perverting the course of justice, he got his whole life prison order. On the 19th of October 2012, Christopher Halliwell pleaded guilty to the murder of Sian O'Callaghan, a lady that he'd picked up outside a nightclub in Swindon in March 2011 before stabbing her to death. He got life with a minimum of 25 years. While he was under arrest for Sian's murder, he confessed to killing another woman several years earlier, the lady being 20-year-old Becky Godden, but the High Court decided that his confession wasn't wasn't admissible because in some way it had been obtained illegally. Thankfully, 4 years later, police found fresh evidence unconnected to Halliwell's earlier confession, and on that evidence he was convicted of Becky Gordon's murder. And on the basis of that second murder conviction, he got his whole life order. That came in 2016. Now we've got the joint case of Kenneth Regan and William Hornsey. In 2003 in London, 5 members of an Indian family were kidnapped and murdered by a criminal gang. The millionaire businessman Amarjit Chauhan disappeared along with his wife, his 2 baby sons and his mother-in-law. The bodies were initially buried in Devon before they were later dumped in the sea off Poole in Dorset, where 3 of them were eventually discovered in the English Channel. The bodies of the 2 little boys were never found. Kenneth Regan and William Hornsey were given whole life orders for the 5 murders. Peter Rees was convicted of one of the murders. The motive was financial, as they planned to take over Amarjit Chauhan's freight company, which they then wanted to use as a front for importing drugs. The case was highly publicised due to the sheer brutality of the crime, and the trial was the longest in the history of the Metropolitan Police. John Sweeney, who was born in 1958, murdered 2 girlfriends of his 10 years apart and was already banged up for the attempted murder of another girlfriend of his when he learned that he was getting a whole life order for his 2 murders. A carpenter, Sweeney murdered Melissa Halstead, 33, a former model from Ohio in the US in 1990, before murdering Paula Fields, 31, a mother of 3 living in North London in 2000. He hacked each woman to death, dismembered them each, and then dumped their remains in canals in London and in Rotterdam. Likewise, he attempted to kill a 3rd girlfriend with both an axe and a knife. I have no idea why the man did what he did. Police, furthermore, think he may have committed 3 other murders too. Sweeney got his whole life order in 2011. For many years, David Fuller, who was an electrician in a hospital in Kent, which has since been closed down, got away with the 2 murders that he committed. They were of Wendy Nell, who was 25, and Caroline Pearce, who was 20. He committed those down in Royal Tunbridge, Wales. They were known as the Bedsit murders. He was eventually caught for those murders and given a whole life order, and along with that he was given a sentence of 12 years for the SA of more than 100 female corpses in 2 hospital mortuaries, and he did those offences over a period of 12 years. The judge of Fuller's trial said that Fuller, quote, had no regard for the dignity of the dead, unquote. Fuller's whole life order came in 2021. Jeremy Wing, who was born around 1941, is one of the only 2 current prisoners who've been given a whole life order for something other than murder. Can you guess what his offences are then? Before he got a forever prison sentence, which he did in 2002, Wing had been inside before for, child, you know what offences. Sometime after getting out, he fell under suspicion of essaying 3 boys and was subject on that basis to a police raid of his home, which was out in Huntingdon in Cambridgeshire. Not only did the police find in the man's home toys, motorised go-karts, water pistols and video games, they also found video recordings showing Wing, along with another man by the name of Brian Hogg, graping 2 of the 3 boys in question. Wing and Hogg had met in prison where, like Wing, Hogg was doing time for child S-bleep X offences. The grapes that the 2 PDF files perpetrated against their victims from the early 2000s were so violent that the injuries that they caused to the boys will never heal. I will state at this point that I have no idea how the boys came into the physical control of the 2 twisted antagonists. I don't know how the parents of the boys, or whoever was supposed to be in charge of them, let Wing and Hogg get their hands on them. Wing having begun his abuse of the 2 boys shown in his home movies when they were 7. We'll call those boys Tom and Adam. In 2002, on being convicted of grapes and of other offences relating to Tom and Adam, Wing got his whole life order. So did Hogg, but he later got his whole life sentence quashed and replaced with a shockingly lenient 10-year term. No idea where the man is as at the time of this recording. Mark Robinson was born in 1962. At 17, he joined the RAF. On the 27th of May 1979, he was home on leave for the spring bank holiday. He went round to the home of one of his neighbours, a 32-year-old woman called Patricia Wagner, who was a wife and a mother. He actually tricked his way into her house by pretending that he was drunk and had mistaken the house. In any case, the two got talking, had sex apparently, according to Robinson, and it came on his instigation. But then at the end, Mrs. Wagner apparently said that if Robinson didn't tell his mother that they had just had sex, she herself would, and apparently the thought of his mother finding out what he'd done with his married next door neighbour was just too terrifying to Robinson, and so he got hold of the cord of a lamp in Mrs. Wagner's home, wrapped it round her neck and strangled her to death. In March 1989, he came out of prison having done the 10-year minimum term of the life sentence that he got for Mrs. Wagner's murder. He met a 25-year-old lady called Sharon Morley in Wakefield. The couple soon moved to Billingham, and that started lots of arguments between the couple, all because Sharon wanted to move back to Wakefield. On the 19th of September 1989, Robinson discovered a photo of one of Sharon's former boyfriends, and in the argument that followed, he beat and stabbed Sharon to death. His original life sentence, which he got in 1989 for Sharon's murder, was later upgraded, thankfully, to a whole life order. Lawrence Burton, who was born in 1959, is a triple murderer. On the 25th of June 1995, 79-year-old Aileen Duddill and her 72-year-old sister Elsie Gregory discovered their gardeners, Lawrence Burton and Michael Pluck, stealing from them. Burton and Pluck reacted by bludgeoning and suffocating the sisters to death. They then piled the sisters' living room furniture over the bodies of their victims and set everything on fire. Both men were jailed for life at Sheffield Crown Court in 1996. In February 2012, Pluck died in prison. Burton, however, was released from prison on licence in 2017. He was recalled to prison in 2018 but released on licence once again in 2020. On the 9th of November 2021 in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, Burton battered his 73-year-old neighbour, Pauline Quinn, to death with her own coffee table. The cause of death was traumatic head injuries. Burton's abuse of drug and alcohol was considered by the prosecution to be a contributing factor to the man's acts. Burton got his whole life order in 2023. In February 1989, together with a friend of his, 17-year-old Paul Glenn went to steal 5,000 quid from a local guesthouse owner called Ivor Usher. Believing the money was stashed in the safe, the pair tied Mr. Usher to a chair, but for some reason, Glenn suddenly went mad and bludgeoned the man to death with a bar stool and a wrench. Afterwards, in an effort to cover his tracks, he set the place on fire. Glenn was jailed for life, but he got out on licence in 2002 after doing 13 years. On getting out, the man followed in the footsteps of John Childs and became a hitman. Having accepted a contract to kill a bloke called Vincent Smart, armed with a kitchen knife, Glenn travelled down from Liverpool to Farset in Cambridgeshire, where his target lived. On reaching the man's house, Glenn kicked the door down, stormed up to his victim, who was in the middle of making dinner with his girlfriend, and stabbed him repeatedly in the hands, the arms and the chest, one stab going through the man's heart. While Glenn was killing his target, the girlfriend of the victim went and hid behind a sofa. She was unharmed. In 2005, given his previous murder conviction, Glenn got a whole life order. And by the way, in the contract killing that he carried out, he offed the wrong bloke. Mr. Smart wasn't in, you see, when Glenn came calling. His housemate, Robert Bogle, was, and that's who Glenn murdered. The murderer seemed not to have even got the basics of contract killing right, including knowing how one's target actually looks, although arguably his contractors held an equal share of the blame for that. Mr. Bogle was black. Glenn's intended victim, however, was white. David Baxendale was born in 1971. In 2001, out in Spain, he got 11 years for the murder of his friend, who he stabbed 14 times while he was under the influence of drink and drugs. After only 7 years, though, in June 2008, he was released and deported back to the UK. On the 10th of May 2010, a friend of his who lived in a flat in Redhill, he met this lady called Sarah Thomas, and the two seemed to have, got a liking for one another, and then they got a taxi back to Sarah's flat around 5 p.m. She lived in High Street, Nutfield Village, and then for reasons that I just don't know, Baxendale murdered her. He stabbed her several times with the fatal wound going straight through her neck. In March 2011, Baxendale got his whole life prison order. Of the 4 murders that Robert Maudsley, who was born in June 1953 in Liverpool, committed between 1974 and 1978, 3 were committed while he was in criminal custody. One of no fewer than 12 children, Maudsley found himself, at the age of 8, being returned to the care of his parents after having been taken away from them, along with some of his siblings, at the age of 21 months, due to serious parental neglect. He was returned to the care of social services at 16, however, after suffering years of the most horrific violence and essay from his lorry driver father, who was often put up to his abusive behaviour towards his son by none other than his wife, Maudsley's own mother. Having developed severe psychological trauma, as attested by his numerous attempts at suicide, and having become a substance abuser, at 20, Maudsley was supporting himself down in London by working as a prostitute. He garroted a client of his, John Farrell, over in Wood Green, North London, in March 1974, after the man showed him pictures of his child SA victims. After handing himself into the police, Maudsley was sent to Broadmoor Hospital, a psychiatric unit, having been deemed unfit to stand trial. Nothing much came of the man's act from 1976 of holding a fellow patient hostage. That wasn't the case, however, when he murdered another fellow patient by the name of David Francis, who happened to be a child SE ex-offender. Having carried out Francis's torture and murder alongside David Cheeseman, another patient, Maudsley claimed that his reason for ramming a sharpened spoon into his deceased victim's ear with such force that it penetrated through to the man's brain and then splitting the man's head open, exposing his very brain, was to enable him to literally feed on the man's brain. Even though the perpetrator was proven ultimately not to have cannibalised his victim in any way, the media dubbing of Hannibal the Cannibal that this claim of his earned him has stuck with him even up to now. Maudsley was tried for and convicted of Francis's murder, sent to Wakefield's maximum security prison in West Yorkshire, planned on the 29th of July 1978 to murder 7 of his fellow inmates, succeeded in murdering 2, got a whole life prison order, got moved into an underground cage built specifically for him, and in 2000 had his request for a pet budgie denied. When, in April 2025, the man was moved to HMP Whitemoor in Cambridgeshire, he had spent all of 42 years in solitary confinement, with, moreover, the 51 years that he served, as at the time of this recording, he's the UK's longest serving prisoner and apparently has no desire to be released. Well, when you're bound by your sentence to be locked up until you die, that's quite handy, I'd say. John Taylor got his first life sentence for a string of sexual offences that he committed from 1977 to 1987, and they include some of the most horrendous types of sexual offences that there are. Alongside those offences were grievous bodily harm and many, many other offences. He got his second life sentence in June 2002 for the murder of Lian Tianan, and that second life sentence in fact turned into a whole life order imposed on him in 2018. While Simon Wilson, who was born in 1957, is a murderer, his whole life order doesn't come directly from his act of murder. On being moved to Australia with his family at the age of 2, Wilson racked up a total of 77 offences over there, including 6 rapes and a vicious murder. After serving 16 years in prison for that murder, in January 2008, at 50, Wilson was deported back to England. On his return to the UK, however, the man learned that his case was found not to meet the criteria to put him under any control orders, which left him free to do whatever he wanted and go wherever he wanted. Likewise, the authorities were powerless to force Wilson to sign the SE ex-offender register, the man choosing not to do so on a voluntary basis. A few months on, in September 2008, the man was given a whole life order after pleading guilty to attempted rape, wounding with intent, and causing a person to engage in sexual activity without her consent. In April 2008, you see, Wilson attacked a 71-year-old woman, who we'll call Lucy, on her doorstep in central London, slashing her across the face and across her body as he tried to rape her. Lucy had to be hospitalised for 5 days and was left so badly injured from the attack that she was at risk of losing the use of one of her arms. Wilson lost his 2009 appeal against his whole life order. As a convicted murderer, however, he isn't quite in the same category as either Jeremy Wing or another non-murderer whole lifer, John Wass, who you're soon to meet. Double murderer David Mitchell, who was born around 1968, is gay. However, originally he was straight. The proof of that is the fact that in 1990 he murdered his girlfriend. He did his second murder, which was that of his gay lover Robert Hind, 4 months after getting out of prison for the murder of his girlfriend. He murdered Robert Hind in the hostel that they were both living in after getting out of prison, where they met in December 2013. And his apparent reason for the murder was that he was really angry when, after they had sex, Hind told him that he was HIV positive. The court, however, when this came to trial, didn't believe him for a minute. They reckoned that he had known about it long before then, and therefore that wasn't the reason why he killed Robert Hind. He got his whole life order in 2015. John Wass is in the same position as Jeremy Wing on a whole life order for a crime other than murder. Wass was 69 when he was convicted of 17 counts of historical child abuse. Can't say the word because of YouTube's decency policies. And these offences included rape, SA and sexual exposure against 3 different victims going back to the 60s. He got his whole life tariff at Derby Crown Court in 2017. Born in 1970 or thereabouts, in 2001, Jason Gomez stabbed his business partner Robert Jones to death. I believe their business was a window cleaning business. Then on the 25th of March 2015, together with a fellow inmate called Paul Watkin, Gomez lured another inmate called Darren Flynn into a cell at HMP Swellside and then stabbed him over 190 times with a thin black handle and a knife wrapped in material. I have no idea why the 2 men did what they did to the victim. Gomez got his whole life order in 2015. Russell Oliver, yet another prisoner who's inside for murder and commits a murder again while inside. On the 31st of May 2015, Russell Oliver, who was then aged 46, attacked another prisoner called John York in his cell at the high security prison HMP Long Lartin. York himself was jailed for life in 2013 for beating a man to death. He died from the head injuries that Oliver inflicted on him. Oliver got his whole life order in 2016. Eerily enough, before jointly murdering a lady called Quen Ngok Nguyen in August 2017, Stephen Irwin and William McFall had each murdered a pensioner and done time for that. They got Miss Nguyen to come to a property under false pretences, and then Unwin raped her, and then afterwards he drove her to a remote location and set her on fire. He then drove to a cash machine and withdrew money from her bank account while the lady burned. The two men got their whole life order in 2018. Ian Burley's first murder was that of 69-year-old Maurice Hoyle, and for that murder he did 18 years. And then in July 2015, when he was 43, together with his girlfriend, a 39-year-old called Helen Nichols, he followed a 65-year-old man called John Gogarty to his home in Roomwell, which is near Barnsley in South Yorkshire, before demanding his PIN and then stabbing him 69 times. The girlfriend, Helen Nichols, got 20 years for the murder, while Burley got whole life. That happened in 2015. Leroy Campbell embarked on his career as a violent criminal with the offence of rape. He did 17 years for the rape of a woman. After that, when he got out, he then raped as well as murdered a nurse called Lisa Skidmore by strangling her with a ligature. This was in Bilston. He also then tried to murder the woman's mother by strangling her with a vacuum cord. Then he tried to cover his tracks by setting fire to Lisa's room and leaving items with other people's DNA on them. The man had only been released 4 months earlier after the 17 years that he did for rape. He got his well-deserved whole life order in 2017. Thomas McDowell presents another case of someone getting a whole life prison sentence for a single murder. McDowell murdered and dismembered a trainee rabbi by the name of Andreas Hint, who was German. After murdering him, McDowell dumped the man's head, limbs and torso in bin bags in Camden, North London. McDowell, who had suffered abuse as a child and had grown up hating homosexuals, pled guilty to manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility. That didn't wash with the jury, however, and he went down for murder and got his whole life prison order. Apparently, the reason why John Childs became a contract killer was because he had a business that was failing, and the only way to save it was to inject it with a substantial sum of money. He murdered 6 people. He was paid to do so, and he did those murders between 1974 and 1978. Childs murdered Terence Eve in 1974, Robert Brown in 1975, George Brett and his 10-year-old son Terry Brett later on in 1975, Fred Sherwood in 1978, and Ronald Andrews later on in 1978. The man was jailed in December 1979, with the murders being committed by shooting and stabbing. It was the arrest on suspicion of one violent crime against a boy that led evil paedophile Victor Miller from Wolverhampton, West Midlands, born in 1956, to confess to another, a murder to be exact. The special school that Miller attended in the 60s, Bodenham Manors School, a centre for boys with severe emotional disturbances, was near the Malvern Hills, an area of countryside spread between Worcestershire and Herefordshire. Of the 29 sexual attacks on boys and young men that Miller is thought to have committed over a 15-year period, the one that he committed on a 16-year-old boy in a park down in Brighton is what led to the term of imprisonment that the SHX offender served from 1979 to 1983. After lying low and abstaining from offending for the next 5 years, in January 1988, the predator had his attempt to kidnap a newspaper boy in Hagley thwarted when his would-be victim managed to run away and hide. A few days later, likewise, the perpetrator drove over to the village of Wellington in Herefordshire, this being familiar territory to the antagonist, remember, and made an unsuccessful attempt to snatch 18-year-old Richard Holden as he cycled home down a dark country lane. A strong 6-foot slaughterman, Richard gave his stocky, knife-wielding assailant a powerful kick in the groin before legging it. On the 17th of January 1988, less than 2 days after the perpetrator's attempted kidnap of Richard Holden, 14-year-old Stuart Goff from Hagley, Worcestershire, went on the first of his 2 early morning rounds of newspaper deliveries, which included a total of 14 houses within a few hundred yards of the newsagent's shop. The police were called sometime later that morning when Stuart failed to return to collect the papers for his second round. After an intense 2-week search, which involved more than 170 police officers, 600 public volunteers, an underwater search unit and police helicopters, Stuart's body was found in remote woodland on the southern edge of the Malvern Hills, which was all of 50 miles away from Hagley, but no less familiar territory to the person behind Stuart's murder. Miller had snatched Stuart moments after the boy delivered the last paper from his first round. After essaying and then partially strangling his victim, Miller bludgeoned him to death with a rock. Miller's disclosure to police of the location of his victim's body came after he spent several days in police custody, his arrest having come before the end of January, the perpetrator having been tracked down after Richard Holden gave police a description of the man's car when he reported the pervert attempted attack on him. Miller's confession of Stuart's murder was triggered by the evidence that was mounting against him in relation to Stuart's disappearance. At his trial at Birmingham Crown Court in November 1988, Victor Miller pleaded guilty to murder and to various other abduction and assault charges. Having long since completed his initial 30-year minimum term, the perpetrator has never once applied for parole, having instead asked never to be released. His obvious remorse, which he once expressed in a direct address to Stuart Goff's family, does count in my opinion. As long as he does stay in prison forever, then to my mind, justice will have been served as far as possible. Anthony Ayres, another man who killed 2 women several years apart, with a prison sentence for the first murder coming in between. So his first murder is the one that he committed in 1994, and the woman that he murdered was none other than his girlfriend. After he got out, which he did in May 2012, he kept a low profile for 3 years, and then on the 19th of November 2015, for whatever reason, he murdered 36-year-old mother of 1, Kelly Pierce, at a friend's flat in Canvey in Essex. He stabbed Kelly 40 times and then beat her to death. He got his whole life order in 2016. Phillip Heggarty murdered his friend Derek Bennett in a hammer attack in 2003. The man later set fire to a Renault Laguna after placing his victim's body in it. The man's body was so severely burnt that it had to be identified by dental records. Heggarty got his whole life order in 2004. The case of Mark Martin from 2005 feels to me like something of a premonition of the atrocities of Valdo Calocane, and you should look that guy up if you're not familiar with his horrendous acts. In 2005, Mark Martin killed 3 homeless women in Nottingham, and he killed them between December 2004 and January 2005. He said that his motive for the murders was to become, quote, Nottingham's first serial killer, unquote. He had 2 accomplices and they were also convicted, but whereas Martin got a whole life prison order, his accomplices received prison terms of 14 and 25 years respectively. Ryan Matthews committed 2 murders and got life for those murders in 1983. On getting out, he went and murdered a healthcare assistant called Sharon Wall at Wootton Hill Hospital in Gloucester. He did that on the 9th of July 2014. Matthews left Broadmoor Secure Hospital in 1999 under the Mental Health Act, and his mental health had deteriorated throughout stays in various hospitals following his release. Matthews, who used to be known as Stephen Cecil King, got his whole life order in 2015. Born in 1977, in 1993, John McGrady was sent to prison for 5 years for false imprisonment of a young woman that he had abducted at knife point as she got off a bus. In 1998, the man was jailed for 6 years for graping and essaying 2 women that he knew. On the 25th of September 2005, Rochelle Holness, a 15-year-old girl who was a neighbour of McGrady's, disappeared after going out to call her boyfriend from a phone box near her home in Lewisham, South London. It's thought that McGrady abducted Rochelle from the phone box at knife point before taking her back to his home, where he strangled and dismembered her. 3 days after doing that, he confessed to his girlfriend what he'd done and then slashed his wrists in a suicide bid, which failed. He got his whole life order in May 2006. On the night of the 21st of June 1971, a steelworker from Cardiff in his mid-20s by the name of Malcolm Green slashed the throat of a 41-year-old woman with a broken bottle. The woman's name was Glenys Johnson, and she happened to be a sex worker that the perpetrator, who murdered this stranger on wasteland near the local docks, had come across. As well as causing a 5-inch wound to Glenys's neck, which nearly decapitated the woman, Green cut several other parts of his victim's body as well, the body subsequently being found half naked and lying face down under a car in a nearby street. In police custody, the perpetrator's confession, which came as soon as the man sat down to be interviewed, but which the man later retracted, said, quote, "I don't know how I done it. All I had was a comb and a shilling. The next thing I knew, I was walking home smothered in blood. I know I did it," unquote. After doing what he did, Green had gone to his workplace, British Steel Corporation's East Moors work, which was nearby, to shower, change, wash his blood-stained clothes, and make a taunting phone call to the police in which he said, quote, "Have you found the body yet? There will be 4 more. This is the Ripper," unquote. That very phone call, though, was then traced to Green's workplace, and the murder itself was then traced to Green, which had to have made the man feel like a total fool. After arresting the perpetrator, police learned that he had told his wife, Marilyn, a few months earlier that he wondered what killing someone would be like. Following that, in their subsequent search of the man's home, police found a dummy made out of a rolled-up carpet, dressed in a shirt and coat, with a knife embedded in its chest and with a red substance staining the area of the stab point. In November 1971, at what was then Cardiff Assize Court, for Glenys's murder, Green got life with a minimum of 25 years. On the 22nd of March 1990, a motorist found in the 2 holdalls that she had spotted sitting by the A467 near Rogerston in Newport, South Wales, 2 upper arms, 2 legs and a torso. All the body parts were individually wrapped in plastic and sealed with sellotape. 4 days later, a young farmer who came from St Bride's, Whitelock, some 15 miles away from Newport, found, wrapped in a plastic bag, a severed and bludgeoned head. Nearby, meanwhile, was a white plastic bag containing 2 amputated hands, with the 3rd finger on the left hand completely crushed. These body parts had come from a 24-year-old New Zealander by the name of Clive Tully, who was last seen alive on the 19th of March in Bristol, southwest England. On that day, Clive, who was broke at this point, had asked a friend of his to put him up for the night. Having agreed to do so and then dropped the man off at his home, Malcolm Green, who'd come out of prison 5 months before, later bludgeoned Clive, his friend, with a hammer and then sawed his body into pieces before bagging it and then scattering it in the bags along rural roads down in South Wales. It's hard to see where, between having been born in 1946, ending up as one of 12, losing one of his brothers to a horrific train accident in 1965, getting married at 21 and working as a crane driver at a steelworks, Green developed his evident bloodlust. Before working as a crane driver, he had worked at a slaughterhouse, as do many other people who don't go on to kill. At the end of his 1991 trial for what was dubbed the body in the bag murder, Green got another 25-year sentence. As at the time of this recording, however, the perpetrator was still locked up because Kenneth Baker, the Home Secretary at the time of the man's sentencing, promptly upgraded the perpetrator's sentence to a whole life term. And I, for one, am fucking glad. It almost feels as if there was literally no crime that Hakeem Kigundu didn't commit. He was an illegal immigrant. He was given an eviction notice due to his persistent antisocial behaviour, and that notice triggered him to set fire to the block of flats where he lived, which was in Reading in Berkshire. The fire claimed 2 lives, that of Richard Burgess and that of Neil Morris. It also seriously injured 2 others. The man got a whole life order in 2022. Billy White. He murdered his girlfriend, Lucy Aries, in 2015, and then he got sentenced to 15 years as the minimum term of his life sentence. But then when he was in prison, like others before him, he murdered a fellow prisoner, someone called Brett Rogers. And the man himself was a convicted murderer. But as I say, murderers murdering other murderers, it's still murder, and it doesn't make any of them a hero. This was again at HMP Long Lartin, which is in Worcestershire. He got a whole life order in 2017. Peter Moore was born in 1946 and he used to manage cinemas in North Wales. That was when he wasn't committing any of the 4 murders for which he is now rotting in prison under a whole life prison order. Before he took to murder, the man committed no fewer than 39 sex attacks on men in North Wales and in Merseyside over a 20-year period. He committed his 4 murders between September and December 1995. He stabbed his victims and then mutilated them. At trial, he told the jury that the crimes were committed by a fictitious homosexual lover that he nicknamed Jason after the killer in the Friday the 13th horror films. The jury, of course, found him guilty on all 4 counts of murder. In March 2011, Moore challenged his whole life prison sentence in the European Court of Human Rights, and he aimed, in fact, to have the whole life order outlawed throughout Europe. However, he failed. Born in 1950, in 1975, Michael Smith met a 19-year-old woman by the name of Sheila Deakin, and the two became a couple. However, the relationship was fraught in some way from the very off, and in an argument over a previous boyfriend of Sheila's, Smith strangled his girlfriend to death. Smith did 30 years for that murder. He learned nothing from that punishment though, since in August 2006 he battered his mate Peter Summers to death with a champagne bottle before stealing 8,000 quid from the man's home, this having been his reason for what he did. With that second murder, in May 2007, Smith got forever, a whole life prison sentence of course. Born in 1971, in 1989, Desmond Lee murdered his landlady, Shirley Carr, by strangling her with his bare hands. His reason for killing her was that she had taunted him over the breakup of his first gay relationship. He pled not guilty to murder but was convicted anyway, and he did 14 years, and he got out in 2004. Now, after getting out, he got a new boyfriend, a man called Christopher Pratt, who was actually a married father of 2. And then on one occasion, the 15th of August 2009 to be exact, over at Mr. Pratt's home in Sackville Street, Lee killed his lover by breaking his voice box and by breaking a bone in his neck. The body of Mr. Pratt was still in the flat when Lee stole the man's credit card and debit cards, and with those cards he paid off a phone bill, bought alcohol for a party with his neighbours, ordered more than £200 worth of food from Asda, and attempted to buy £1,181 worth of goods from Argos. In court, this time he admitted to killing Mr. Pratt, but he claimed it was a freak sex accident. In April 2010, he got his whole life order. George Johnson is a double murderer. He did 20 years of a life sentence for a murder that he committed in the course of a burglary that came in 1986. Then when he got out in 2011, he murdered 89-year-old Florence Habish in February in order to get money to fund his drug addiction. It was a fully premeditated murder as well. He got his whole life order in 2011. Alan Maidman has got convictions for robberies and for possessing a knife. and for 2 murders. He got his first murder conviction and he served his time and then he got out. But then 9 months later, in 2017, he murdered again. It was a man that he believed had assaulted his girlfriend. He murdered that man by stabbing him 32 times. He got his whole life order in 2017. Stephen McCall is a former gangster who got his whole life order in 2006 for 2 murders. His first victim was a man called Michael Doran, who was a member of his gang, and the reason he killed him was that he suspected him of being an informer for Greater Manchester Police. And yet, crazily enough and ironically enough, after he killed Michael Doran, he himself became an informer for Greater Manchester Police. The man's second victim was a man called Philip Noakes, whose crime against McCall was to have publicly humiliated him. On the 3rd of April 2010, John Maiden, who had an obsessive interest in pornography that related to you-know-what-ophilia, rape and torture, called his sister Lynn and asked for Lynn's daughter, his niece, to go to his home in Cheetham Hill in order to babysit his 10-year-old daughter. When Tia arrived, which was at 3 p.m, her uncle drugged her with an antipsychotic tranquilizer that he himself had been prescribed. After doing so, he inflicted a horrific catalogue of injuries on his niece before stabbing her and then strangling her with a ligature made from a guitar string. At 3:45 p.m, Madden phoned the 999 emergency services and said, quote, "Hi, I would like to report a murder," unquote. And then when he was asked by the operator what had happened, or rather why he had done what he had done, he answered, quote, "Because I felt like it," unquote. He got his whole life order in October 2010. For committing 3 murders plus grape, all in a single sitting, Arthur Hutchinson, who was born in Hartlepool, North East England in February 1941, has been locked up since 1983. When, on the 22nd of October 1983, he sighted in the garden of a home in Dore, South Yorkshire, a large marquee, Hutchinson was on the run. The marquee was where 59-year-old Basil Lakener, his 55-year-old wife Avril, their 28-year-old son Richard and their 18-year-old daughter Nicola had, earlier that day, held the wedding party of the couple's other daughter, Suzanne. After entering the marquee in search of food, Hutchinson broke into Richard's bedroom and stabbed him to death. When the perpetrator was confronted by Richard's father, Basil, at the top of the stairs, he stabbed him as well, the man ending up at the bottom of the stairs after falling backwards. Hutchinson then stabbed Richard's mother, Avril, in the downstairs bedroom before going back upstairs and graping Nicola at knife point, first in her room, then out in the marquee, and then once again back in her room. To get Nicola from her room to the marquee and back again, the perpetrator had walked her past the dead bodies of her mother, father and brother. After being caught on the 5th of November 1983, shockingly, the perpetrator was only sentenced at the conclusion of his trial that was held in September 1984 to 18 years. Thankfully, the Home Secretary of the time, Leon Britton, subsequently upgraded the sentence to a whole life term, and Hutchinson's many appeals against that tariff have all failed. Mark Richard Hobson, who was born on the 2nd of September 1969, killed 4 people in North Yorkshire in July 2004. His first murder was that of his very girlfriend, Claire Sanderson, and he killed her at their home, which was near Selby. After that, he lured Claire's twin sister, Diane, to the home and then murdered her several days later. Afterwards, he fled the property and murdered an elderly couple who lived several miles away before going on the run. He was arrested soon after, 8 days after I think, when he was spotted hiding in bushes near a petrol station in North Yorkshire. A bin man who had a history of violence, drug addiction and alcoholism, Hobson pleaded guilty to all the charges against him in April 2005 and got his whole life prison sentence. His subsequent appeal for a lower tariff failed. In late August 1988, Anthony Arkwright, who was born in 1967 and comes from Wathapondane, South Yorkshire, murdered in the space of 56 hours at least 3 innocent individuals, one of which being none other than his own grandfather. One of 5 siblings, all of whom having had their mother walk out on them at an early age, Arkwright was subject for much of his life to rumours that his own existence had sprung from an act of sexual intercourse between his mother and her male progenitor. While he was inside in his late teens for offences of burglary and disorder and for other crimes, he read up on serial killers and told his fellow inmates that he would one day be as famous as Jack the Ripper. On getting out, Arkwright got a job at a scrap merchant's in Mexborough, South Yorkshire, only to be sacked on the 26th of August 1988 for forever bunking off. The young man responded to this event first by going round to his grandfather's house in Adwick Road, Mexborough, stabbing the man, 68-year-old Stanislav Podojkas, in the neck and then taking hold of a 6-kilogram lump hammer and crushing the man's skull with it. Assuming that he only murdered his granddad because he thought the man was his dad as well, he killed the man for nothing. His granddad was nothing more to him, relationship-wise, than his granddad. It has never been proven that Arkwright murdered his granddad's 73-year-old housekeeper, Elsa Chronodite, while subsequently stealing the dead man's £3,000 savings. This allegation, however, sits on the perpetrator's criminal file as a matter of record. When, in the early hours of the 28th of August, Arkwright broke into the home of his next-door neighbour, 48-year-old former teacher Raymond Ford, who Arkwright had always hated and always victimised, and stabbed the man up to 540 times before draping his entrails around the room. But for the devil's mask that he had on, he was stark naked. In the morning of the 29th of August, to complete his maniacal murder spree, Arkwright broke into the specially adapted bungalow belonging to his other next-door neighbour, 25-year-old wheelchair user Marcus Law. As payback for all the cigarettes that Law had scrounged off him before that point, Arkwright stabbed the defenceless man at least 70 times before trying to gut him, exactly as he had done to poor Raymond. On failing to rip out the man's insides, Arkwright opted instead to embed one of his victim's crutches into a gaping wound in the man's stomach. Gouging the man's 2 eyes out and then pushing cigarettes into his eye sockets, ears and mouth is what else the psycho did. Having been locked up since 1989, Arkwright is set to die in prison in line with his whole life prison order. He forgot, you see, to get away with murder like his savage and mentally disturbed idol Jack the Ripper did. I hope every day of his life in prison has been hell and that it stays like that forever. Born in 1960, in 1995, David Tiley got 6 years for double grape. In March 2007, no more than 2 weeks after getting out, after getting into an argument with his fiancée, Susan Hale, in which she taunted him about something from his past, he stabbed the woman to death. This took place at their home in Southampton, South England. Susan was a disabled person, which was due to a degenerative brain disorder that made it really hard for her to walk. 8 days later, when Susan's carer, a married mother of 2 called Sarah Merritt, came round to give Susan a bath, Tiley tied her up, took her bank card and then went out and got 150 quid out with it. On returning, the man raped Mrs. Merritt and then stabbed her to death. He got his whole life order in June 2007. Ian McLaughlin was born in 1958. Between 1970 and 1983, he was in and out of prison for a range of offences, including burglary and theft. In 1983, he beat his boyfriend, Lendell Gatty, over the head with a hammer and then strangled him with a towel. He was convicted of manslaughter and got 10 years, but that was reduced on appeal to 8 years, and then the man was released after only 5 years anyway. In September 1991, he got his new boyfriend, a barman called Peter Halls, to lie on the bed in a fantasy game and then killed him by stabbing him in the back. In 1992, he got life with a minimum of 25 years. In July 2012, he was let out of prison on day release, and he decided to use that day release to go around the home of ex-prisoner and SE ex-offender, 86-year-old Francis Corey Wright, who he'd met in prison, and rob him. And so that's what he did. He tied Corey Wright up while he searched his house, and he was just about to leave with a pillowcase full of family heirlooms when a neighbour by the name of Graham Buck came over to investigate the shouting that he'd heard. McLaughlin dragged Mr. Buck into the house and then killed him by stabbing him in the neck. In 2014, the 40-year minimum term that McLaughlin had got in 2013 for the murder of Mr. Buck was upgraded to a whole life order. For reasons that aren't known to anyone other than the perpetrator, in 2013, former soldier Anwar Rosser, who was born around 1980, murdered a 4-year-old boy who lived in the home that Anwar Rosser had been allowed to stay in for the night. I can't find exactly how Rosser did what he did, but having been described as a psychotic, bullying alcoholic, he murdered the little boy, whose name is Riley Turner, while the little boy was sleeping. He got his whole life order in 2014. Paul O'Hara's first murder was that of his girlfriend Janine Waterworth in, I think, 1998, or at least that's when he was sentenced for her murder. And then he was released around 2013, and of course, on being released, he went over to the home of his new girlfriend, Shirley Shenan, and that's where she was given evidence to 2 police officers about the domestic abuse that she'd suffered at the hands of O'Hara. He burst in, attacked the 2 police officers with a hammer, chased Shenan into the street, and then on catching up with her, he stabbed her to death. He got his whole life order in 2014. Marc Chivers, who was born in 1967, is the son of a British Army officer who was serving in Germany. Chivers was born and raised in Germany. In 1986, he met a lady called Sabine Rappold, and she soon became his girlfriend. In 1992, he strangled her with a rope and then buried her body in a shallow grave in Woodland and went on the run. He was caught and arrested 3 months later, and in 1993, he got a life sentence in Stuttgart. After doing 15 years for the murder of Sabine, in 2007 he was released but deported back to the UK. In July 2008, he had a girlfriend by this point and he attacked her. Her name was Maria Stubbings. He got 4 months in jail for battery of Maria, but they stayed together, and there were a number of other occasions when Chivers got out that Maria called the police on him, but nothing came of it until one point the police came round after Maria Stubbings got them over, but Chivers is the one who answered the door, and he told the police that she'd gone out. And then a few days later, in fact it was the very next day, they came round the first occasion on the 18th of December 2008. And they came back the next day and they found Maria's body, which was hidden under a pile of clothes in the downstairs bathroom. This time Chivers strangled her with a dog lead. Perhaps he just didn't have any rope handy. He got his whole life order in December 2009. Wilbert Anthony Dyce got away with the murders of a mother and her 2 children for nearly 3 decades. Dyce was 26 when he raped and stabbed Norma Richards, 27, to death after following her home from a nightclub on the 17th of July 1982. He then stabbed her 9-year-old daughter Samantha to death and drowned 7-year-old Siretta in the bath at their flat at 54 Kingsgate Estate, Dalston, East London. Dyce, whose own mother lived just a few hundred yards away, left the scene after daubing the NF for National Front symbol on the walls in an attempt to make the murder look like a racist murder. The bodies of all 3 victims were found 2 days later on July the 19th by their grandmother Myra and by the stepsister of the 2 girls, Rodine. The murder weapon may have been a 19th century bayonet, which was kept in the flat as an ornament. Nobody suspected Dyce's involvement, his name was never given to the police, and he was never interviewed. It was only during a review in 2009, which was sparked by a query from a journalist researching a book about the footballer Laurie Cunningham, the brother of Norma's partner, that his DNA was matched to semen samples that were found at the scene. Confronted with this damning evidence, Dyce claimed that he had had sex with Norma Richards in the toilet of a nearby club hours before her death. He was convicted, however, of all three murders on the 17th of December 2010 after a trial at the Old Bailey. The court heard that he had also sexually attacked two other women in their own homes and stabbed his ex-wife. At the age of 54, Dyce was jailed for life with a whole life order. Before the moment when he murdered his 7-week-old baby daughter, which he did by throwing her head first onto a settee, Andrew Randall, who came from Kettering in Northamptonshire, had, on previous occasions, kicked the baby across the floor, stamped on her chest and put his fingers down her throat. He had also essayed her. After getting caught, he told police officers that he resented his 7-week-old baby daughter and that he had done so since the moment she was born. By the recognised criminal justice process, the man got his whole life order in 2007. By prison justice, in 2011, he was stabbed in the eye and had his throat slashed. This took place in Longlartin. John Duffy is a rapist and murderer whose close friendship with his partner in his evil crimes, David Mulcahy, stemmed from their shared Irish Catholic heritage. Born in 1958 in the Republic of Ireland, Duffy, whose family moved over to England in search of work, instantly hit it off with Mulcahy in the year 1970 at Haverstock School in North London. One night in October 1982, the two, who were now young men of course, raped a 21-year-old woman after jumping out on her as she walked home and then putting a knife to her throat. They then forced her into the garden of an empty house before forcing themselves onto her. In the course of 1983, the two men, who, by this point, were both married, committed no fewer than 18 rapes, their victims being pounced on late at night in streets mainly near railway stations in Hampstead, Barnet and other areas around North London. This led to the two men gaining the media dubbing of the railway grapists. The two men continued their rapes through to 1985, committing on one occasion 3 rapes in a single night in the said year, Hendon being where. In December of the said year, the two men strangled 19-year-old Alison Day to death with her own blouse near Hackney Wick, East London. They did that after raping her. In April 1986, they did the same to 15-year-old Marta Tamboza, sorry if I mispronounced that name, in West Horsley in Surrey, South East England. The following month, they kidnapped 29-year-old Anne Locke after she got off a train at Brookmans Park railway station in Hertfordshire and then raped her before murdering her. Duffy later offered a simple explanation for the two men's escalation to the offence of murder. Rape alone had stopped satisfying them. When, on the 26th of November 1986, Duffy was arrested while following a woman in a secluded park, the perpetrator having taken to committing rape alone on some occasions, you see, his 3 murders, along with some of his rapes, rapidly unravelled. What he kept secret for years, however, even after the 30-year prison term that he got in early 1988 was later upgraded to a whole life order, was the identity of his accomplice. Mulcahy, though, a father of 5, has been locked up since 2001 and isn't expected to get out even when he's done his 30-year minimum term, his former partner in rape and murder having grassed him up, you understand, in 1997. When Rashan Arshad murdered his wife and their 3 children in a so-called honour killing, he felt, quote, totally justified in what he did, unquote. That quotation comes from the police who were involved in the case. A 36-year-old taxi driver, Arshad beat his wife and 3 children to death with a rounder's bat at their home in Cheadle-Hulme, Manchester in July 2006. This then is how Uzma Rayhan, 32, Adam, 11, Abbas, 8 and Henna, 6 all lost their lives. According to investigating officers, Arshad felt his wife had brought the killing on herself by having an affair. This adulterous behaviour of Uzma's shamed the whole family, meaning that they all had to die, except the husband. If you're thinking that, at the very least, the 3 children, who were wholly innocent for crying out loud, should have been spared, sometime after getting caught, Arshad expressed regret for killing them. He got his forever prison sentence in 2007, and he's not the only family annihilator that we're going to meet among these whole-lifers. In July of the year 2000, down in Hersham in Surrey, 41-year-old Roy Whiting abducted and murdered 8-year-old Sarah Payne. In May 2008, up in Huddersfield, West Yorkshire, 21-year-old Subhan Anwar murdered Sanam Nafsakar, the 2-year-old daughter of his then partner, Zabina Nafsakar. In 2010, Whiting's original 50-year sentence was cut to 40 years. Anwar, meanwhile, only got 23 years. So what are these 2 murderers doing in this presentation? Well, this particular chapter is less about them and more about the murderers Gary Smith, Lee Newell and Gary Vinter. In 1996, Gary Vinter, who was born around 1970, got 10 years for the stabbing murder of his 22-year-old work colleague, Carl Eden. Then, less than 2 years after getting out, he stabbed to death his estranged wife, Anne White, which earned him his whole life prison order. Gary Smith, who was born in 1965, did his first murder alongside another man in 1998. Lee Newell, who was born in 1969, became a murderer in 1988 when he murdered his 56-year-old neighbour. But both Smith and Newell only got a life sentence, giving them, as such, every chance of getting out at some point. So again, why am I talking about them? Well, these 2 murderers now have practically 0 chance of ever seeing freedom again, having each been given, in 2013, a whole life order for strangling Subhan Anwar to death with his own pyjamas in his cell at HMP Long Lartin in February 2013. In February 2016, meanwhile, Gary Vinter got himself another life sentence for his attempted murder of Lee Newell from November 2014. This act of Vinter's, which he perpetrated by repeatedly kicking Newell in the head, was the man's way of protesting not having yet got the transfer to a prison with a better gym that he had requested months before. An officer from HMP Woodhill, the prison in question, reported that after doing what he did to Newell, which ended up leaving the man blind in one eye, Vinter remarks to officers, quote, "That's what happens when you mess me about," unquote. Prior to this violent act, in 2011, Vinter stabbed Roy Whiting in the eyes with a sharpened toilet brush handle before kicking and punching the man as he lay on the floor. In explanation of this attack, Vinter told the court that it was because Whiting was, quote, "a dirty little nonce," unquote. It emerged at some point either before or after Vinter's courtroom testimony that the attacker's true motive was to get himself better prison conditions. Don't ask me how doing what he did was actually supposed to achieve that. In any event, after getting hospital treatment, Whiting made a full recovery. That said, in 2018, 2 of his fellow inmates jumped him while in 2024 he was once again stabbed. Honestly, murderers attacking and murdering other murderers. In the early hours of the 7th of August 1985, near the village of Tolly's-Hunt Darcy in Essex, southeast England, Neville and Jean Bamber, both 61, their adopted daughter Sheila Caffell, 28, and Sheila's 6-year-old twin sons Daniel and Nicholas Caffell were all shot dead in their home, White House Farm. The only member of the immediate family to survive the night was the adopted son, Jeremy Bamba, who was then aged 24 and who, luckily for him, had been at his own home in the nearby village of Goldfinger when the mass murder took place. The police were first alerted to a disturbance at White House Farm when, at 3 a.m. on the 7th of August, Jeremy himself called them, claiming to have just received a distressing call from his father, telling him that his sister had gone berserk and that she had a gun.
My father's phoned from White House Farm and he sounded really frightened. He says, my sister's gone crazy and she's got a gun.
Jeremy added that after he himself heard a shot being fired, the line had gone dead. In his call to the police, Jeremy referred to his sister as a nutter. This was a reference to the lady's recent diagnosis of schizophrenia. Initially, the police wrote this devastating set of murders up as murder-suicide. When they went to investigate, you see, they found the body of Sheila Caffell with blood oozing from her throat and with the semi-automatic rifle belonging to Neville, with which all the murders had been perpetrated, lying so as to be pointing towards Sheila's throat. One of Jeremy's cousins, however, whose name is Anne Eaton, discovered 3 days after the killings that the silencer to the murder weapon was in a cupboard in the home instead of being on the rifle, which is where it had always been kept. It seemed very unlikely to Anne and to other members of the family that Sheila would have murdered everyone with the silencer on the rifle and then thoughtfully gone and put the silencer away before shooting herself. They also estimated that keeping the silencer on the rifle would have made the rifle too long for Sheila to reach the trigger in order to shoot herself in the face. It also emerged that Sheila had not one bullet wound to the face, but 2, which, as you can see, makes it even less likely that she shot herself. It's also hard to believe, I'd say, that instead of calling the police or trying to save either his family or himself when his daughter started shooting everyone, Neville Bamba chose to call his son instead. How could he have done any such thing with bullet after bullet flying around his head, for instance? Jeremy Bamba murdered his entire immediate family for the substantial inheritance that he stood to gain after doing so. Straight after the funerals, which took place a few days after the killings, the young man not only went on a windsurfing holiday with his girlfriend, Julie Mugford, but also did lots and lots of partying besides that. That doesn't sound like grief or sadness to me. It was Julie's very report to the police some weeks later, when she and Jeremy had split up, of Jeremy's year-long plan to do away with his whole family and frame his sister, that triggered a renewed police probe into the massacre, which led, in October 1986, to Jeremy's conviction for the killings and to the whole life prison sentence for the perpetrator that came with that. Together with her husband, Fred West, between 1973 and 1987, Rosemary Pauline West, who was born in November 1953 in Northam, Devon, southwest England, murdered 9 young women. On her own, she took the life of an 8-year-old girl. West had just turned 15 when, at a bus stop one night in early 1968, she met 27-year-old Fred, who I'll be referring to from this point on as perpetrator F. What the two couldn't possibly have known at that moment was that each was from a highly abusive background, West, for instance, having grown up essaying her younger brothers after being repeatedly raped by her father. For his part, while persistently suffering abuse of some kind from his father, perpetrator F first had sex at the age of 13 with his own M-H-O-T-H-E-R. What the two did rapidly discover in one another was a deep-rooted taste for pornography, prostitution and sadism. When they moved into 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, southwest England, they had since got married and were expecting their second child, their first having come a year after they met. West had, by this point, also murdered 8-year-old Charmaine West, one of her husband's 2 children from his earlier marriage to a woman called Rena Costello. When perpetrator F, who was banged up at this point for theft, learned what his wife had done, he was, excuse me, overjoyed. In line with this, in exchange for his wife's murder disclosure to him, perpetrator F disclosed to his wife his own murder of his children's nanny, 18-year-old Anna McFall from 1967, and that of his 27-year-old ex-wife from 1971, this being the year of West's own murderous act. Of the 6 further children that West birthed, 3 were fathered by the punters that she slept with in her home-based sex work, who were mainly men that her husband invited over after approaching them in local pubs to f*** his wife for money. I don't know if West's own father paid his daughter when he came round to thingy her, but I can confirm that perpetrator F always used to watch his wife being f***ed by other men through a peephole in the wall. He made videos of his wife's sexual coupling with strangers as well. Perpetrator F had built, all by himself, the torture chamber in the basement of his home where, in 1972, he and his wife imprisoned, tortured and raped their 17-year-old nanny, Caroline Owens. The next 9 victims of the evil couple, however, would suffer a far more devastating ordeal than that of Caroline, who was too traumatised and too scared to testify against the couple after managing to escape them and then file a police report against them. Being suspended from the ceiling of the torture chamber for days on end and being systematically tortured and raped in that time, all in the lead up inevitably to being murdered, is what, very sadly, befell Linda Goff, Carol Ann Cooper, Lucy Partington, Therese Siegenthaler, Shirley Hubbard, Juanita Mott, Shirley Robinson, Alison Chambers and Heather West. These women, who were all aged between 15 and 21, were mainly kidnapped at bus stops, one such place having ironically been, to remind you, where the evil couple had met, or while out hitchhiking, or while they were the couple's very lodgers. There are 2 theories on what led to the 1994 arrest of the murderous couple. One is that one day in 1992, some of their children approached a police officer as he walked down their street and basically told him that one of the girls was being abused by their father. A second theory is that the police were alerted, again in 1992, by the mother of a girl who was a school friend of Louise West, who was born around 1978, when Louise allegedly told the school friend that she had recently been twice dragged down to the cellar, the torture chamber that is, tied up and raped by her father. Whichever theory is true, it took 2 years for the police to be prompted to get a search warrant, go round to 25 Cromwell Street and start digging the garden up, the home's backyard being the main burial site of the young women who were murdered at the property. This action from the police came in response ultimately to the family joke, in inverted commas, that the 5 youngest children had, in the 2-year interim, been telling people, which consisted of their dad's previous repeat threat that they would end up, quote, under the patio, unquote, if they misbehaved. While she had been repeatedly raped by her father from a very young age, Heather West, who was born in 1970 and who died in 1987 at the age of 16, could never just accept it, which led to an occasion at 16 when she fought back particularly hard when her father was about to do it to her again. Hers was one of the many bodies that the police found literally under the patio of the garden of her home, West having stomped her daughter's head until the girl died for not letting her father rape her. The mother's act of murder had come after West and her husband tied their daughter up and raped her. The people that the couple's 5 youngest children had told the under the patio joke to were the foster carers with whom they had been placed as a result of the allegation of their father's rape of Louise, the court case for that having collapsed when Louise refused to testify. On New Year's Day 1995, perpetrator F hanged himself at Birmingham Prison. West, meanwhile, continues to serve the whole life prison sentence that she got in late 1995, HMP Newhall in West Yorkshire being her current home. I hope it's her current hell as well. Andrew Dawson, who was born in 1962, has killed all of 3 people in his lifetime, and he did so between 1981 and 2010. In August 1981, in his native Ormskirk up in Lancashire, Dawson murdered his first victim, Henry Walsh. Mr. Walsh was a shopkeeper who was 91 years old at the time of his murder, and Dawson stabbed the man 11 times. Dawson was convicted of Mr. Walsh's murder in 1982, but was released on licence in 1999. On the 25th of July 2010, John David Matthews was found stabbed to death in his flat in the Derby area of Chaddesden. 5 days later, in the same area, Paul Hancock was also fatally stabbed. And you'll never guess who stabbed them both. On both occasions, Dawson placed the bodies of his victims in a bathtub of their respective flat so that he could get rid of their odours. On the same day that Matthew's body had been found, Dawson was arrested in Whitehaven, which is in Cumbria. On the 18th of July 2011, he got his whole life order. As for Viktor Dembovskis, for some reason, despite his history of grapes in his home country, Latvia, the man had been allowed to remain in the UK. Sadly for Jeshma Raythatha, a 17-year-old A-level student from Harrow in northwest London, this enabled the man in May 2005 to repeatedly grape her and then stab her to death on her way home from school. While the perpetrator got his whole life order for his atrocious acts against Jeshma in 2006, the effects of those acts didn't end. Unable to cope with what had happened to her big sister, you see, in 2009, at the age of 15, Jeshma's kid sister, Nishma, threw herself off the top of a car park and died from her resultant injuries. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.